Welcome everyone to this Tarkett panel discussion about rethinking the sustainable workplace. We are delighted so many of you could join us today and wanted to take a few minutes to set the scene for what we hope will be an informative and lively discussion with our panelists about the sustainable workplace. My colleague, Rob Croft, Communication Manager, EMEA, will then introduce our panelists before moderating our discussion. First, I wanted to share with you the background context and research which has helped shape today's discussion. There have been many changes in the workplace in 2020. Some of these changes are due to the actual workplace altering. Some are due to families adjusting to the current pandemic, while other changes are more subtle yet impactful. To understand how these behavioral trends might impact an office design specification, Tarkett has been running an ongoing research project, Rethinking Workplace, since 2018. To date, we have surveyed 11,700 people working in commercial offices across 14 countries worldwide. The research has been carried out in collaboration with a number of research partners, CoreNet Global, OnePoll, and WK Space. The CoreNet Global research, which took place before the pandemic hit, was specifically focused on the circular economy and to what extent U.S. organizations were striving to operate to the most stringent standards. It suggested that a heightened awareness around sustainability is the single most important factor to driving change in this area. Our more recent surveys carried out during the COVID-19 outbreak suggest that the health crisis could in fact be a catalyst for change. As the pandemic continues to unfold, our research reveals that employees have a renewed sense of purpose and that environmental policy is seen as a key issue for them. In fact, the Rethinking Workplace study highlights that office workers in both the US and Europe are becoming more concerned about their employer's level of commitment to environmentally led initiatives. Honing in on the US specifically, when asked in September this year, office workers highlighted environmental issues in the workplace as their greatest concern. By contrast, in the pre-COVID CoreNet study, not a single US survey participant called out the need to address the company's environmental stance. This is a significant shift in position and one that is mirrored across Europe. For many Europeans, the pandemic has seemingly shown a light on environmental concerns too. Today, we have gathered an esteemed panel of experts from both the US and Europe to explore these findings better, to discuss if this is a trend that they are recognizing in their own work and what they believe is driving this. We also want to explore what they believe businesses need to do to make sure that while the world is naturally preoccupied with health and well-being, the focus on sustainability isn't lost. This is a topic really close to our heart here at Tarkett. We are focused on becoming a circular economy business through a number of key initiatives anchored around cradle-to-cradle principles, collaboration, and closing the loop. We don't just want to be a company that recycles or decreases our greenhouse gas emissions, but one that truly can make an impact on what is important to our customers and our employees. We believe that when an organization focuses on a circular economy business model, they are also setting up a standard guidelines for decision-making, which they can then become clear and focused. Does it meet the standard to move our business in a circular economy business model? If not, then you explore other options until you find a path that will guide your business to a circular economy. We'll explore this topic as well as the strategies that can be incorporated by businesses to support the new concerns of their employees. Now I'm pleased to introduce our moderator, Rob Croft, CSR Communication Manager, EMEA, who will introduce our panelists and lead the discussion.
Sorry, I'm muted myself. Thank you, Roxanne. Thank you very much. Thank you also to the panelists and to everyone in the call for giving up your time to be with us today. I'm really excited about our panelists because they're all specialists, front runners and game changers in their own fields. So it's going to be a very interesting discussion this afternoon with them through a couple of questions. And at the end, I hope we'll still have some time to take questions from the audience. But first, let me introduce you to them. From London, we have Nietzsche Magdalene. He's an architect and associate partner of Insight Futures. Nietzsche has over 20 years experience of working across the areas of design, construction and property development as an architect, but also as a sustainability expert. He also held strategic roles at BAM and with the Supply Chain Sustainability School, and is currently working with clients to put in place design and construction solutions towards net zero and circular economy. From the USA, Wisconsin, we have Dr. Mike O'Neill, author and founder of Human Space. Dr. Mike is an author and strategist who specializes in how to use workplace design to reduce stress and improve workforce performance. He founded Human Space to help businesses identify the workplace capabilities that are most important to employee well-being using artificial intelligence, including healthy buildings. And then from New York, we have Sandra Tripp. Sandra is a design strategist for clients in various service sectors. She's passionate about helping clients articulate their visions on how corporate real estate and design professionals can better influence construction and renovation decisions that determine sustainable ratings. Couldn't be more relevant. And then from the other side of the United States, in California, we have Ryan Ware, co-founder and vice president of Construction Vantis. Ryan is a strong advocate of greater collaboration to accelerate change in the construction industry and using adaptable prefabrications as a means of addressing the sustainable response. He currently leads the construction division of contractor and specialty subcontractor Vantis. So let's see what they think about the outcome of the research through some questions. And the first question is, our research indicates that employees are more concerned about what the employee is or is not doing to support the environment in the wake of the pandemic. Does this surprise you? And where do you think this is coming from? I'm pretty sure you all have an idea about this, but let's start with Sandra.
Hi there. Yes. So this is absolutely no surprise to me. We have seen through employee engagement surveys that some of the most important things to employees are the values of their organization. And now with the pandemic, people have a heightened focus on health and well-being. And this is definitely an area in terms of sustainability. It's not just sustainability of the planet, but it's of the human.
Thank you. Is it someone else who wants to say something about that as well?
Yeah, sure, I can say something. I would agree absolutely with what Sandra is saying. I think sustainability is a key issue for the youngest generations of office workers, the Gen Zs that are just entering and the millennials. Those groups are value driven, they're very purpose driven, and they expect an organizational culture of sustainability. And I would add that in my mind, sustainability also includes well-being. So when you think about indoor air quality and the physical and ambient environment, and especially with COVID, but well-being also, in my mind, also means your emotional and mental state, and stress and so forth. And so what I'm seeing is that there's big efforts to try to normalize that conversation around stress and mental health and so forth. But I'm sure the other panelists, would agree that we can look at sustainability very broadly to include these other aspects.
Yeah, I'll just kind of mention some studies that we've been working on and working with other groups. We're kind of a collaboration of companies that own Vantis. So we have different research done, and one thing that we're seeing is the office it's kind of switching, right? The home is now the primary, the office becomes the secondary. And as Mike mentioned and Sandra, it's now well-being. People want to go to the office to get away from home, but they want it to feel like home. So the way we use the space, how we're using it, how we're going to program, we want to go there to address different needs than what we're getting at home. And again, I think because of the pandemic, when you hit pause, you get a chance to reevaluate really what we're doing and how we're doing things, which is, the acceleration speed of the younger generation wants us to pick up the pace. They're very social conscious, not just about well-being, but every move that they make. They bank differently. They want to look at investing in companies that are socially conscious and really have impact investing opposed to just throwing money into 401ks. So it's not surprising at all that as we pause and we don't sit in vehicles anymore for 2 hours, because I'm from the Bay, we have more time to think about other stuff. And the office is primary now and forethought because it's empty. It's sitting there empty and we're not using it. And it's what are we doing next with it? and how are we going to approach that? So.
I was just going to add, actually, I think most of the things have been said, but really just, just using the sort of COVID period that we've had, in lockdown, and in the UK, we're in a second lockdown. I think companies are just using this time to take stock of, their position. And obviously they've got immediate troubles that they need to deal with employees working at home, flexibility, etc. But I think they're really looking at that longer term strategy now. And we're starting to see that in industry, where they're looking at sustainability for that longer term, health and well-being, as Mike and everyone said, flexibility, resourcefulness. Even how do you, I think in everyone's situation, having been at home for the last 6 to 8 months, being resourceful has become everyone's sort of job at home. And I know that I've changed the way that I do things just because I've got more time to think about it. So I think generally people are thinking, and companies are thinking, how do we reintroduce people back to, that workplace, which, may or may not become the norm, but certainly, there are different ways that we're going to be reintroduced back into that space.
Research points out that when people are going back to the office, they want reassurance that it is safe. That's what they expect from their employer. Do you think that a safe office is also a sustainable office? Is there a relationship between these?
I would say almost by definition.
Yep.
Right? Because if you think of the office, Ryan alluded to this, if you think of the office as a resource that you can access, and I think there's some real soul searching going on about just what is the role of the office, but there are certain things you can do there that maybe you can't do as well at home. So I think that, part of the idea of a sustainable office is going to be, well, what's the new role? What are resources that you can go to access there? Hard resources like certain technologies that you can't get at home, or maybe soft resources like your social and professional network. And that you have to preserve that for the health and sustainability of organizations.
Agreed. I mean, some of the driving factors that we're hearing from organizations that we're talking to right now about what to do, it always goes back to what the employees need and what they're looking for and how to best support them. And I would say that's a seismic shift from where we were maybe 10, 15 years ago about designing the workplace. It's encouraging because I think that caring about your employees is really just reinvesting in, it's good business. And I think that the same thing can be said for sustainability. And I think it's just refocusing it. Instead of thinking about it as an extra layer, it should be integral into how you approach everything.
Do you think that employees link a sustainable building or office to a circular economy?
I certainly think that, in my experience, working with BAM and really pushing the circular agenda, it probably started very much as an environmental response. Where it started because we wanted to keep material value in use, or keep it at its highest level, but keep materials in use for longer. But more and more, I'm realizing that actually it has other impacts as well. So if you look at cradle to cradle materials, for example, how can you perpetually cycle those materials so that they can be reused again? And often you're then looking at health as one of the primary benefits there, but also socially, how do you, by reusing those materials, repurposing, etc., you're investing in society, you're investing in new methods of construction, often things that we've ignored for the last century or two, just because we're thinking short term, we're thinking of making a product and not really thinking about its legacy going forward. So I think there are a host of benefits that are wider than just looking at environmental even.
Yeah, just that's one of our primary focus within construction, is that methodology for interior construction to be more adaptable and flexible, which is actually been around for a century. It's just been dominated by more conventional methods. And just, I think we're, during this pause, you hear more and more how we have to design more flexible spaces, more adaptable, which is truly a change in our entire philosophy and process of design. Because it's not just, certain assemblies being flexible, the whole system has to be thought through. And you have to think through not just hard cost, you got to think through, full cost of ownership and what does that truly mean to the client as you're designing it, as you're budgeting it. I said yesterday to somebody, an estimate is a very black and white document that has no emotion. But when you design towards flexibility and full cost of ownership, there's a lot of emotion and decisions and testing while you're flying and flying while you're testing as you're going through the process. And we can't go back to saying just because we had success for 100 years building conventionally that we got to keep doing it. We have to slow down, in my opinion, to rethink that these materials can be reused. How best can we adapt to them? How do we design the HVAC system? Raised floor access, modular power to allow things to shift. We're in the seismic zone out here, but there's still possibilities of reuse. We have a lot of throwaway spaces, 3-year leases. You think you can, you design it and you toss it. But we're in a period now, a lot of people are going to watch what do we do with these spaces? How do we use analytics to see how we're using them? How empty are they? Can we use, shared spaces a little easier? Is it more co-working type, more loungy, whatever it is? The hard construction side or the flexible, I will say now, is more about how might we use it now, but how do we easily be able to change over its life cycle? And everyone's always said, well, that costs more. Well, yeah, it probably will the first time because we're only focused on a bucket. So in order to get to the circular economy, it's changing the density of the space. It's changing how you're building it to allow core and shell to last longer, interior to really move and flex with you as your company grows and other companies grow.
Wow.
Right, I would totally agree, Ryan, with what you're saying, especially if you think about not so much the construction, but my perspective would be the flexibility of the interior space. There's always been such resistance to making investments in the construction methods and materials because it's like that upfront cost looks a little higher. But I'm kind of wondering now if companies are realizing they have to have that flexibility just for the sake of business continuity, perhaps, and being able to react very quickly. And then also when you start to layer in the use of sensors and the availability of analytics to understand and maybe even predict how the space is going to need to flex, it's truly going to be a much more sustainable, longer lasting office space instead of, well, the building's good for whatever, 20 years at most, and then we just got to get rid of it.
Thank you for this so far. The second question is at least as important. And interesting to see what you would think about it. How do we make sure that sustainability stays a key strategic force for businesses going forward as they perhaps struggle post-pandemic? What do you believe are the key drivers to ensure this? I think I know what Nitesh's solution will be, but Nitesh, can you start with this one?
Sure. I should have asked you to guess and sort of see if you're right. But I think people need to, or companies need to take a longer term view, and that is, again, thinking about COVID and how companies are re-strategizing. How do they come up with their net zero commitments? Because governments are starting to, sort of follow, it with sort of the ambition that's set by the younger generation. That we need to create that climate emergency, we need to respond. So creating the net zero commitments in line with governments, set targets, tangible targets, but also look at financial metrics, but not just financial metrics, but broaden their view of value and to evaluate performance based on natural capital, social capital, human, as well as manufactured and financial. And I think it's that broader term view that, if companies sort of take that view, they're more enlightened. They're going to provide, value back to society as well as to their own pockets. And and surely that's the way forward.
Yeah, I mean, I'm encouraged because we've seen a number of companies, even pre-COVID, and in their design brief, when we're searching for real estate with them, they're actually looking for spaces that might be reconfigurable as opposed to needing to be completely demolished and rebuilt. And you know, having worked in New York City my whole career, oftentimes I'm working within a building that's already been built. So figuring out the most creative, economical way to repurpose that space for someone is something we've always been doing. And you know, it's been heartening to see that companies actually understand what the impact of coming in and completely demolishing a space is and having to throw all of that away. I have a number of clients that are like, oh my God, I can't believe we're wasting all of that. So it's exciting to me and it's actually another creative challenge to figure out how can we make this space viable for the new business use. And, you know, thinking about long-term, typically our leases here in New York are 10-year leases. So it's almost impossible to predict what a business is going to need 10 years from now, 5 years from now. So trying to build in that flexibility from day one is key. And I think that, again, you know, you're asking about how do we make sure the focus isn't lost, right? That this isn't just a quick reaction and then it's going to go away. It just needs to be part of the conversation. You know, I have companies that can full well afford to demo everything and rebuild it. It isn't an economic pressure, but it's a different type of pressure. And they're like, well, let's spend our money in other ways. And that way we, you know, it's a win-win.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think when you think about the ROI of sustainability, I would also say it goes past just the material costs or the wasting and landfilling of things. And, you know, what is the human capital payback for an investment in an environment that, say, provides well-being? Because so if you can protect people's well-being and their physical and mental health, downstream, you're going to have operating cost impacts on the workforce spend. You'll have fewer lost days due to illness, perhaps. You'll have better retention, which is like it's very expensive to replace people. So I think if we can model ROI based on maybe you're making an initial longer term capital investment, but also respect the fact that it's going to hit on a different pocket of money, the operating costs, then that's a fantastic case, because it's you know, it's out there, the whole idea of health, and then either the softer aspects of workforce performance, things like that. Again, it's a little bit harder to get your hands around that, but it's clear that if we can convey a broader understanding of what ROI means, I think it's and also I think that real estate has been turned inside out with COVID, and it was always just the space. Let's just talk about the space. And I think it's part of a longer trend. Now it's kind of flipped inside out, and now we're kind of starting with the people. What do the people need finally? And so then it makes more sense to put an ROI case together that also includes the cost and the benefits of what the work that people are doing and their health.
Right. Ryan, do you want to add something? Or?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, everyone's made great points. I think when we look at the different areas that we focus on, and I am getting a chance to work with Sandra's team a little bit in this discussion with a client, and it is more that the space is now, it's not just a space, it's an experience for the well-being of that employee. And I think for too long, we in construction, because I am in the construction arm now, not in the architecture, we do only focus on the construction cost. And we have to start to think about the ROI of sustainability being, you know, that it isn't just throwaway. And to be honest, it's not just about like shifting things here and there. It's how we build, you know, to allow access to different components within wall assemblies or floor access to make minor changes, because it's not usually big changes, it's usually a minor thing. As technology advances very rapidly, I mean, I can think of projects as an architect I designed and saw built in early 2004 or 5, and then you go back to them and you're like, okay, trapped you inside this building for 10 years because the iPhone didn't exist. So now as we see this acceleration of technology and the change in the need within the office, It's more than just what we build or how we build. It's why we're building. And I do think that experience focused return on investment to the employee has to allow or force us to change and make it the forefront. Because employees are staring now at our real estate, seeing it empty and wondering, what will you do with it? You know, will we lower the square footage, change the density, change how we use it? And are we going to allow it to flex with us, or will we continue to design the same way we were pre this pandemic? So
something completely different. Nietzsche already said that young people will demand from companies that they have a sustainable strategy. To make sure that it stays there, do we have to mobilize also older employees? Because they don't seem to care at the moment. So we have to make them aware of the fact that this is something that they can ask for.
I mean, I've certainly, in my experience at BAM, you know, how you persuade people is an art. You know, when you're trying to incentivize them to do something, and often, you know, what incentivizes a board member is usually financially driven. But then, you know, you get the younger generation that come through and they really believe in what you're doing. And often, you know, I've sort of left it to that younger generation to push something for me, because I know that, you know, that they're doing it for the right reasons, and they have a huge following behind them. It's not just the one person, but in a company of 20,000 people, you know, you've got probably 50% of, you know, under 30s. It's huge to be able to leverage that onto the board and to position your ROI alongside, you know, that emotional response as well. And you know, more so when you're talking about social, like people to people benefits. I don't think that's just limited to the younger generation. You know, I've seen many, you know, people of my age and older, you know, really get to grips with actually sustainability is about us. It's about all of us. So I think that there's been a huge change in how people have perceived sustainability, and you know, certainly on the people side, you know, they really want to get behind it because they can feel that they're part of it.
Yeah, I think you can. Oh,
go ahead,
I'll just have very super brief responding to what you're saying, Nitesh. I think you can have policy needs. I tend to believe personally that policy follows social change, and you can have all the laws and legislation in the world, and people will ignore it if they don't fundamentally as a society agree with it. So I tend to think it's kind of a two things going on: a change in societal norms with the younger generations, and then we do need policies then that will support that and help to drive it.
I agree on both fronts. You know, I kind of think about it sometimes it's the carrot versus the stick, right? And I think that the encouraging with incentivizing folks, making it an opportunity that there is a payback, even though we know there's a long-term payback anyway, can help move the needle. But you know, I've been witnessing, yes, younger employees seem to be more vocal about it, but it's also then encouraging people of my age and older who didn't question what their bosses did. You know, it was your job was your job, and your personal views were your personal views. And now that's blended into one thing. And I think that that's great. And I think that it actually makes people feel more free to weigh in on where they think their organization should go and push for positive change.
Yeah, I know, you know, I'm a Gen X side. So for me, I'm always questioning, and maybe I'm seeing even my younger generation do it. And I think it is, you know, how you deliver the message, I think, as Nitesh said, when you're trying to persuade and you're looking across, you know, what's in it for them. Everyone's like, what's in it for me? And I think the reality is with sustainability, it is much broader. You know, I think when we first started and we got in the lead and we looked at things, manufacturers naturally made some changes. Then that policy went because it became more important that, you know, if architects were driving, they wanted to see sustainability and groups did, we all sort of followed and made changes to see it happen. And I just think that, you know, as we look at this, and I do like this, you know, with the circular economy, it's bringing things more to the forefront, that it isn't just, you know, we're recycling. And I think great, we're recycling. It's the reuse, repurposing. It's how the manufacturing is being done. It's how I think technology is going to help advance. I think dematerialization of the world is a natural thing through technology. In the technology use, now we have to go, what do we do with the technology? How do we make sure that we're being good stewards with recycling that? And it'll just, I mean, I feel like it's naturally happening and becoming a main criteria in our lives to, I know California is big in it, but to say that it's just the right thing to do. It doesn't matter whether it's policy. We don't need to use a big word to define it. It's just, we got to make it more about, it's the right thing to approach. And whether it's design or just what we do in a personal life, and the decisions we're making daily. So.
Ryan, do you think that circular economy is the main tool to attack climate change?
I think it's I mean, I'm looking at it and seeing that it can generate, you know, we can generate jobs with it, right? I think we can get analysis and look at how we're using the spaces, how we're underutilizing spaces. I mean, take for example, you know, carpooling when it started, right? I mean, carpooling started to get vehicles off the road and have more people shared spaces to get better utilization in a vehicle. The office space, the homes getting more density, and I feel like as we start to look at spaces becoming adaptable, how we're using them, where we live, where the offices are, and utilizing all of those things, how we design, I think it can be a great asset, but it doesn't, you know, I think we've got to get more engaged with the manufacturers, more engaged with, you know, the whole purpose of the space to help it. Because if we continue to drive right now on a single project, you know, we look at it this way, it's like, I got a project, single project, I'm going to build it and go. And we only analyze that project as in that manner and not think about it in the whole life cycle cost of it, then we'll be continued trapped in it. Because it's just like we build, you know, we want to get shovel in the ground, we want to get going, we got to get through this process, and we're not thinking about it as, how long will this be here? And is it the right answer to build right now? Or is there another space we can work through and get and obtain and be able to work from and build with? We can't look at it as a throwaway building anymore. We work with some large healthcare organizations that are like, this is a 150-year building. How do we make it a 150-year building? And that's the start of it. It's a big part of it. And I do think that as we figure out how we're going to travel, you know, as the car industry changes and transportation changes, where we live is going to change. You know, does the gig economy changes? Does you know, contract working change? The working environment as well. All of those things are going to impact it. But I do think that the circular economy is a big opportunity, and Nietzsche can add more to that. But it's just we have to analyze the whole process. We got to get out of this. It's a single project, and that's all I'm going to focus on.
Nietzsche, as a circular economy specialist, do you think we can do something about climate change without the circular economy being realized?
Well, I was going to add to Ryan's point in terms of utilization of buildings, assets, etc. I think that's really important, because circular economy isn't just a word or two words. It's about how do we use what we have already and use it efficiently. But then, you know, going back to your question, Rob, for me, you know, the whole sustainability agenda probably focused too much on energy initially. So I think what's changed is, you know, the words resourcefulness and circular economy have sort of put sustainability in perspective a little bit more, where we're thinking not just about the energy, and that's important, but also thinking about the materials and how we use those assets over time, and not just to deconstruct them at the end of life, but then to, you know, think about reuse as a as a tangible, alternative, or actually not just an alternative, but an essential way that we need to think about things, not just build it once, but build something that can be reused again and again. And then obviously the social aspect as well, the implications of, having net zero, having circular as concepts, but also thinking about regeneration, thinking about the impact on society. And I think they're all huge issues, but certainly I think sustainability in general is becoming more rounded and probably more understood.
Very clear, very clear. Before I go to my last question, I want to mention that the audience can put questions in the chat so that we at the end can try to answer some of your questions. But my last question is, what do you believe European and American businesses can learn from each other as they tackle their environmental challenges? Not that I think that Europeans can learn more from the Americans or the other way around, but Mike, can you share your thoughts on this to start with?
Yeah, I think broadly speaking, there's a real groundswell. I think there's a new moral compass that's making society change, and we've all been talking about this, but kind of a movement towards social responsibility, a movement towards sustainability, a movement towards well-being, and everybody's demanding it. It seems to me investors more and more are demanding it. Occupants are demanding it. Employees want it. And so I would say that I think Europe is ahead of the US a bit in this groundswell of societal opinion where, sustainability is valued and et cetera, or maybe it's just more embedded in the culture. I don't know, but I think a little bit is that the US has a more of a short-term focus on the financial return, which may have held it back a little bit. I think that's rapidly changing. And so I think maybe they could learn from each other, and the US could take the long view, and that could be more supported by government policies. And then I think the EU could work to make more of a financial ROI case for investment and sustainability. But regardless, I think we all need to push together to do what we know is right, even if it means that we jump out of our roles and take, as Ryan was saying, like this much broader kind of perspective. So, including well-being with sustainability and including circular economy. These are terms that sounded fairly esoteric just a few years ago, and now they're becoming more of the common vernacular. But I would go, kind of going back to the idea of healthy, sustainable practices in buildings and well-being. It's got to represent one of the biggest population healthcare opportunities that we're looking at maybe in our lifetimes.
Yeah, just to add to that from a European perspective, and I've worked across Europe for the last decade or so. I think ESG investments, as you said, Mike, I think that's true. We've seen only in the last few weeks really that a couple of big statements that I've heard of. Aviva Investments, they invested in a 150 million asset portfolio. And that was based on a 10-year sustainability incentive plan. So after 10 years, if that portfolio met its sustainability criteria, then their rate of sort of payback would decrease, which is a brilliant incentive. And also yesterday, I think it was, I read another article saying Scottish Widows were divesting from 440 million of its portfolio because of disclosures, environmental or sustainability disclosures that don't meet current practice. And again, these are two brilliant examples of how that investor piece is now starting to sort of influence how we design and build and maintain our assets for the next couple of decades. And also yesterday or a couple of days ago, the UK government announced a green finance package or a plan, and that's to basically introduce a taxonomy of disclosure for all UK listed companies, to really set the scene for green investment bonds to meet net zero by 2050, which a lot of a lot of governments have committed to. But it's good to see the action. And I think, as you said, Mike, I think it is by leaning on each other, that we're really going to see the benefits of, actually everyone falling in line with each other to sort of help out and, understand where, our weaknesses and strengths are.
Yeah, I think.
Right.
Yeah, just one thing. I mean, one thing that obviously we focus on is really prefabrication and how that can help sustainability. And one, the workforce, the jobs, the bodies on site, and analyzing that, but also what you can control from a factory standpoint, manufacturing. And we've been talking about it in the U.S. and UK for a long time, and we're watching other countries and other continents kind of succeed. But prefabrication is something that if you can be more sustainable in the materials that you're using in it. It can be flexible, adaptable for that, as we've been talking about the reuse and readaptability of it in the space. But really, it's less bodies to the job site, more in a controlled well-being factory where you can do net zero in the factory to give a better environment and better work conditions, opposed to going inside a TI space and throwing up drywall that you have to sand and wear a mask, and do all the painting inside and think about all the VOCs and everything else. We're just at this cusp of like adopting it and learning how to design around the flexible space. But I just think we can all do better to look at and analyze the prefabrication, so that again, success isn't the best teacher. Prefabrication has struggled to get integrated into interiors. It has been successful, but in most cases, it's going to take us to continue to learn from it so that we can become more sustainable by using it. We can create more spaces. It's always the answer of, well, I'm never going to change this, or I'm never going to move. And that's not a reality. We do always change it. We do always move something. And I always tell everybody, what's the first thing that hits a job site? And it's usually a dumpster. And it makes no sense to me, even if it's a new build. We have to be more conscious that there are different methodologies of construction, not just wall assemblies, but networking and all of these decisions we're making. Technology use is far larger to allow us to address sustainability. So I just think, we've got to get better as a country in the U.S. to understand that prefabrication will continue to grow as technology grows, but we're just at the very beginning. I always say prefab is essentially at the iPhone 3. Like, we haven't been able to really get fully advanced because we don't know what we don't know yet. We haven't given it the chance to really expand.
Well, I think that the fact that when we're building new buildings, it's not the norm to have underfloor power and air as a basic thing is still shocking to me in this country, in the United States, because that inherently gives you more flexibility for reconfiguration down the road. So I definitely think that's where Europe has been a leader on doing more of that when they do build new buildings. And, I think that just thinking about the demands for having a space that's inherently more flexible, a space should not, after 10 years, be completely unusable. So how can we think about designing maybe with a kit of parts that gives you a variety of options so it can flex throughout its use? And that's the approach. And of course, that's going to cost more up front. But I think it goes back to your ROI conversation, right? Illustrating how it might cost less in the short term to change things when you need to flex.
Thank you. We have some interesting questions in the chat.
Yes.
One is what's the role of legislation? Do we need legislation to get sustainability through? Do you think is legislation, is that the way to get things forward?
Certainly, from my experience looking at different countries in Europe, at least, I could see that the UK have been fairly slow at reacting in terms of setting policy, and that's now starting to change. So in contrast to that, as you know, Rob, the Netherlands have been the opposite. They've been pretty good. And, I've seen colleagues of mine really respond to that, really positively, and looking at that as a market opportunity to sort of invest, to look at, what's my market potential? How much work can I win? How can I innovate? And that's happened because policy has been there, but allowed industry to respond, sort of not being too prescriptive. And it's, really taken the sort of leaders to say, look, I want to do this. I want to be the first, forerunner in, 3D printing, or, looking at technology to, make buildings or assets worth more. Let's be more proactive rather than reactive, etc. So I can see that I don't think policy is the only thing we should rely on, but I think well-placed, commitments should come out of this, where we can start to align ourselves as industry and respond to something that government put out there as an ambition.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, can I ask a question to, when we started in 2010 rolling out the circular economy based on cradle to cradle, we saw that within Europe, many countries had different interests, but the UK was the least interested of all. Nothing happened there. I mean, if you talked about cradle to cradle or circular economy, then they said, is it costing more? A little. Then, but since last year, it's the interest is huge, and from colleagues of yours, you hear that the most important element to choose now in a project is sustainability. What happened to make that change? Was it legislation in the UK, or was it something else?
Yeah, I'd probably say that we're just slower at getting going in the UK. And, I attended many roundtable conversations in UK, Netherlands, Belgium, etc. And the rate of conversation was all the same. There was no difference, but clients were not really willing to back any substantial change, as opposed to other parts of Europe. And I think it's just taken them a bit longer. Maybe they're a bit more conservative, different type of people. But certainly now we are seeing the likes of London, Scotland, Wales, etc. They've been probably thinking about this for the last 5 years or more, and now suddenly they're coming out with those commitments, and people are starting to see that actually there's a reality that we need to change. So it's probably hit industry a little bit later than other parts of Europe, but I'm sure we'll catch up.
Sandra, you wanted to add something, I think?
Not
No?
necessarily.
Well, there is a question here, going back to Sandra's comment regarding refurbishment. How can we make sure more waste is recycled and reused as part of this process?
Well, one of the things that we do as an architectural firm is we've been building criteria as part of the projects and then vetting it from a cost standpoint and illustrating to our clients that the cost, it's so minor from an incremental standpoint that we're encouraging them, right? So we're trying to take the carrot approach as opposed to the stick. Like, see, it doesn't cost that much more. Wouldn't you want to do this? And they're like, usually hands down, absolutely, it's the right thing to do. I think that sometimes the louder voices in the room have been, oh my gosh, it's going to cost you so much more money. And companies again are thinking about it as an extra layer. So I think that it's the pocketbook or the purse or the wallet can drive it. But if it is in the context of it's also the right thing to do. And I think that we're seeing more and more companies are willing to spend a little extra. And that's it. Cost has been a driver or a depressor for this historically.
I think we notoriously look at items as singular, as I think is what you you were pointing out, right? We look at estimates and costing, and we look at it one-offs in a vacuum by itself. And we don't look at the blended cost of what it really means. And when we start to widen our frame and look at that, the whole cost, and how that little needle may be moved, but another needle moved down, it changes the perspective to the client. And that's what we try to broaden that window or the frame they're looking at. Because we're constantly getting, as we go into projects, it's like always a 1-for-1. I'm like, okay, we're not just building this one thing. We're building this whole thing, and one thing may impact another, and has this effect, domino effect, that might move the needle here and there, but overall the percentage is very small. And I just think we have to, again, take a step back, look a little wider at what we're doing, and not look at the one thing that we're focused on, and that'll help kind of drive the conversation.
Thank you. There are several questions, but this is one, of course, the big one. When starting a new workspace project, which are the first main points to consider when aiming for sustainability? What has the biggest impact? That's the big question, of course. So can you help our audience a little bit? Who wants to say something about that?
I don't mind chipping in. Just to say that obviously you can't start with just one thing, but as I said before, energy had been the focus, and really focusing on operational energy. And I think the difference now, certainly having worked for a construction company for the last 10 years, is that suddenly there's a focus on what's happening in the design stage and upfront to make sure that the materials that we're using are looking at the embodied impacts, and then obviously looking at the whole, the whole life cycle, and how can we drive that down by choosing the right materials, and thinking about the reuse cycles as well, because it isn't just, as Ryan said a few times, it's not just a one-time thing. So the sustainability agenda does now come down to thinking about materials design, passive design as a prerequisite, and not just, oh, let's let the engineers deal with it afterwards and put in some efficient systems. So I think it's become something that more holistically all of the design team and the client need to buy into early on, rather than just leaving to energy.
I would also add to that, Nitesh. I think if you're looking at how do I have a sustainable approach, I think now we have the opportunity also to rethink about your real estate footprint, your portfolio, beyond just here's the 2 buildings we own or lease, and look at the work that's occurring at home and start to go, okay, if we want a sustainable approach, do we need all the space, the managed space that we've had? And should we be looking more holistically at working from other locations as part of that portfolio? I mean, to me, that's almost like the low-hanging fruit. And maybe it's not so much about slash and burning square footage, but it's about really making sure that the square footage that you're managing is used appropriately as that right resource, and also having analytic tools to look at people's home work offices, which is that we've all been on a million Zoom calls in the last 6 months, and it's kind of hilarious to get a view into how really good or really awful people's home work offices are. But looking at that as a holistic portfolio is also, I think, an opportunity to have a more sustainable approach.
I would add that, it really starts before the real estate. I mean, if you're in a situation where you're searching for real estate, it can be part of the conversation then. And if you're doing a space search with a client and they are looking for something in particular, usually it's asking the right questions early on can get much better results down the road. I think that a lot of the times, some of my colleagues, myself included, in my earlier years, forget that we are experts at what we do, and our clients are looking for us to guide them. And I think that, you know, that's a really important thing to remember, that we have a responsibility to guide them where we think is the best place to go. And it needs to serve their business, absolutely. But sometimes a brand new white box space is not the best solution. And there could be a way to suggest they could meet their needs by taking on a space maybe that's already partially built, and maybe just making some modifications. That's a much more sustainable approach than, like you said, the slash and burn type of thing.
I'm afraid that we're running out of time. We could go on for hours, I think, but for me, this was a truly inspiring and gives hope for the future, I think. We need more people like you to get it realized, but you're an example for others to follow. And I'm sure that Tarkett as a company will put all the innovation in helping to realize the circular economy. So again, really inspiring. Thank you very much. We will keep the discussion going because there are lots of questions that we will put to you afterwards. For everyone in the call, we will share some links to the report results and also the research results, but also information where you can, if you still have other questions, where you couldn't put your questions, and then we will keep the discussion going, and we will keep the whole process going. So thank you very much for being here, sharing all this knowledge, inspiring everyone. I hope to see you maybe live someday, who knows? But for now, thank you very much. Stay safe and stay positive, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay well, everyone.
You too. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.